Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Tuesday, March 13th. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, wherever you check out the Big Blue View Radio Network. And if you happen to be watching on YouTube, you see a familiar face on the other side of the screen here. That is Nick Falato of the Chris and Nick Show, and I stole Nick to talk about the Giants' moves in day one of free agency. Nick, how you doing? And thanks for hopping on short notice.
Ed, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join you, talk some shop. It seemed like in the beginning of free agency, Giants Twitter, everything was kind of falling apart. We saw Tremaine Edmonds, TJ Edwards go to Chicago. A lot of Giants fans were unhappy, but right now, as it sits, 5:08 on Pacific time for me, I'm pretty pleased with what the Giants have done.
8:08 here, and like I told you before we started, I'm old. I'm supposed to be in my pajamas by now as we record on Monday night. But got to take care of business, and business picked up this evening as the Giants made the biggest linebacker splash, the biggest off-ball linebacker splash that they have made since signing Antonio Pierce. When they signed Bobby Okereke from the Colts today. What was your first thought when you saw that signing?
Yeah, so I pronounce it Bobby Okereke, and we're going to have to find a way for somebody to remedy that situation. But I was pleased with it. He was somebody that I wrote up for the website, Big Blue View, on should the Giants explore this option. And I had a lot of players that I was interested in, right? Like Tremaine Edmonds, that was kind of the big fish that everyone was talking about. You can link it into Joe Shane. It made a lot of sense. Rangy linebacker, had 10 PBUs this past season. Then he had TJ Edwards, very familiar with him within the division. But the Giants going to get Okereke, I mean, we're quite familiar with him from that late 2022 game when he elbowed Daniel Jones in the head and he was flying around the field. I mean, that was an Indianapolis Colts team, Ed, that ostensibly gave up on Jeff Saturday, right? Like, it was not a great situation. Everything was kind of falling apart around that organization. Turn on that film against the Giants because you'll see Okereke just flying around the field. And that's the type of player that I want. Somebody who's never going to quit, somebody who is passionate, may toe the line a little bit sometimes in terms of being dirty or not, at least against the New York Giants. It definitely seemed like he did. But I was quite pleased when I heard that he was added to the second level because there was no other position on this Giants roster that probably needed some sort of just competent veteran player, right? And Bobby Okereke is a competent veteran player who I think can take this defense to another level. Somebody who can blitz effectively if you want him to come downhill, something Wink Martindale loves to do. Somebody who can cover if you ask him to drop, which he will. And somebody who has the range sideline to sideline. He's not the most athletic linebacker in the world, but he has sufficient athleticism to play the linebacker position. So I'm quite pleased with the signing.
Whether it's Okereke, whatever it might be, I think I'm just going to go with Bobby O for the rest of the show. I think we'll just go with Bobby O for the time being. Anyway, you look at tackle numbers. Tackle numbers to me are the worst way in the world to judge a linebacker because nobody knows. Well, actually, if you really dig into the analytics, you can figure it out. But just by looking at the tackle number, you can't tell if those are impact tackles, if those are tackles made 5 or 6 yards down the field when the offense has already had a successful play. But what I do know when I look at the measurables, you look at the speed, 82 plus inch wingspan. I think 82nd percentile 40-yard dash speed. This is a guy that has the size, the length, the speed that Wink Martindale craves. Martindale said early in the season, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, if you're slow at middle linebacker, you're slow on defense. And with this move, the Giants aren't slow anymore.
No, they're not slow on defense. Plus, he's a player who is smart, who knows how to understand his run keys, keying diagnose, and then put himself in a position to maximize that athletic ability. And you're right, man. The wingspan is 98th percentile for the linebacker position, the arm length 97th percentile. And when you think about throwing against linebackers with that type of length, it closes throwing windows if you have that type of length. It just makes the windows that much smaller. And in the NFL, Ed, the windows aren't large to begin with. So that's just another notch for Bobby Okereke, in my opinion, or Bobby O, if we're going to refer to him like that. This is a 6'1",
Well,
239
we need to figure
pound.
that one out.
Yeah, no, I'm going to roll with Okereke, man. I mean, and that
All
just
right.
sounds cool in my
Well,
opinion. And
well,
that
we'll go with that. We'll go with that for tonight. We'll go with Okereke. All right, that works.
until someone corrects us, man. Let's
All
just rock
right.
with it. Okay.
All right. Yeah, the thing about it is, what did we see at linebacker for the Giants last year? Austin Calitro and Tay Crowder at the beginning of the season, Jalen Smith and Jared Davis at the end of the season, with a little sprinkle of Micah McFadden, who's an okay downhill run defending young linebacker, but it wasn't good enough. It was a big part of the reason why the Giants' run defense wasn't good enough. And we knew that the Giants had to address it. I've gone back and forth about a linebacker at 25 in the draft, which I really didn't think the Giants would do, and now I'm 100% certain they won't do. But already had a question in the mailbag today.
Okay.
You talked about Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards, and we saw all of the linebackers that came off the board before Okereke signed with the Giants. And the question was, basically, I understand the reader said, I understand why they wouldn't have gone to the numbers that Tremaine Edmonds got. $50 million guaranteed, 4 years, $72 million. Crazy money. All right. But TJ Edwards got 3 years and $19 million. Jermaine Pratt got 3 and 21. David Long got 2 and 11. The Giants paid the second most for a linebacker out of that group. And my blunt answer as to why would they do that? My blunt answer is because this is the guy they wanted. This is the guy they felt was maybe, if they felt, Tremaine Edmonds was the best guy, but out of their price range, this was the guy they were really after, and they were willing to pay somewhat of a premium to get him.
That's what I'm hoping, right? You never want your team that you follow, the team that you love, to settle for the second or the third option. So I'm hoping that you're right, Ed. There's nothing that I can really add to that, because David Long is a really good football player for the value that he signed at, right? Like TJ Edwards is a good football player that the Chicago Bears were able to get at a discount. And I like Bobby Okereke's tape. And if I'm not mistaken, I saw the initial numbers. Sometimes this stuff changes on Twitter. It's $10 million a year, right?
Yeah, it's 4 and 40 with 22 million guaranteed. That's obviously according to the initial reporting. And if you follow these things, you know that by the time we see the actual numbers, by the time the contract, hits the over the cap database or whatever, it might be slightly different than that.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm hoping that he was a Giants' number one choice. From what I've seen so far, just from watching him before I wrote the Big Blue View piece prior to the start of free agency, I liked Okereke from what I saw against the New York Giants. I loved his tenacity. I loved his athletic ability. I loved how it seemed like he could handle a lot of different responsibilities. I've yet to dive into the tape on him yet, but I am eager to get into his tape after we're done with Rakeem Nunez-Roches.
Yes, and let's talk about Rakeem Nunez-Roches a little bit. Joe Shane, I have the opportunity on occasion to sit in front of press conferences or Zoom calls with Joe. And from the day after the season ended, from his season ending press conference right through the combine, he made it clear that one of his priorities was to upgrade the Giants' run defense. To upgrade the run defense and to upgrade the depth behind Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. And for me, this is exactly what the Nunez-Roches signing is all about. It's about run defense. It's not about making spectacular plays and pass rush. It's about having better players on the field when those two guys are off the field. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's not the last defensive lineman they sign.
I wouldn't be shocked about that either. They need to find defensive linemen who can spell Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence. Dexter Lawrence just played the third highest snaps out of all the interior defensive linemen in the NFL, and the guy's almost 350 pounds. He's truly a unicorn out there. And Leonard Williams, he was beat up last season, and that was unfortunate. But at the end of the year, it was Henry Mondu and Ryder Anderson who was spelling these guys. Nick Williams, I felt like, Ed, he was a solid interior defensive lineman who filled his role admirably, but he ended up tearing his pec against the Seattle Seahawks. And after that moment, Giants went into the bye week. They never had any depth. You couldn't take Leonard Williams or Dexter Lawrence off the field and expect your run defense to hold up. And that was with the gigantic liability that the Giants had at the second level at linebacker. So the fact that they were able to remedy both of those situations on the first day of free agency without breaking the bank is something that I'm happy about, at least. And Nunez Roches, man, he is somebody, R&R, I believe you can call him too, right? So he is somebody,
R&R and Bobby O. There
Bobby O. Look at us. We're just coming up with good old nicknames for the newly acquired, newly signed New York Giants. But I appreciate him because he's not somebody the Giants are going to have to rely on too much. He's going to be like 25, maybe 30 snaps a game. If you want him to be a one-gap penetrator, Ed, he can do that. He has the upfield burst. He has the quickness off the snap. He maintains low leverage. He's not the tallest guy. And he fires off the ball. He has a good center of gravity. And he can really penetrate. If you go through his highlights, it's not like he's consistently doing it. He's not Aaron Donald. They're not making him out to be that way. But if you go through his highlights, his top plays, he is beating interior offensive linemen off the snap and just absolutely wrecking rushing paths or getting into the backfield to create pressure. He didn't do that too much. I think he had 16 pressures this past year, 11 in 2021, and then like 12 in 2020, something along those lines. But he was a very valuable asset to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers interior defensive lineman rotation. And I like the fact the Giants got him because he can two gap too. If you want him to sit there and read blocks and just absorb contact and hold offensive linemen to allow Bobby Okereke to scrape over the top and make plays, he can do that for you. So I really appreciate this signing. I think he's a good overall football player and somebody who will be valuable to what Wink Martindale wants to do. And also what does he want to do? He wants to keep Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams fresh. And this is a player who can absolutely do that.
All right. For those of you who are listening across the Big Blue View Radio Network, we're going to take a short break right now. We'll come back. I've got a few other topics to talk about. Want to get into some of the Giants' own free agents that they signed, and the popular free agent who they lost on Monday as well. All right, we're back on the Valentine's Views podcast with Nick Falato, who I stole from the Chris and Nick show for a little bit of a free agency episode here. Nick, we got to get into some of the Giants, the players that the Giants re-signed, players that they brought back. Joe Schoen had made it clear, from the end of the season that he wanted to bring back as many players as he could when it came to, guys that he thought would help this team going forward. And beginning on Sunday, the Giants have done quite a bit of that. They brought back Sterling Shepard. They brought back Matt Breida. They brought back punter Jamie Gillen. They re-signed, finally, exclusive rights free agent, Wyatt Davis, who's a developmental player. But your thoughts on any of those guys that they've decided to bring back?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with Matt Breida because the running back position has been a position that a lot of New York Giants fans, we felt, myself included, that the Giants would invest a draft pick into that position. I still think that's possible. But think about Matt Breida and all the times that he kind of rose to the occasion. Like, we didn't really discuss him all that much as somebody who was pivotal. But down the stretch of the season, the Giants used that pony personnel package, and they were able to move the football well. I mean, they attacked Minnesota with that pony personnel, having Matt Breida on the football field, using him as a wingback, using him in the backfield, using him in a full house formation, a pistol formation. They used him in a variety of different ways. And they were able to get the Minnesota Vikings defense, which wasn't the best defense under Ed Donatel, but they were able to manipulate that defense to win a playoff game. And it didn't work as well against the Eagles in the divisional round, but I still think that is a fun little personnel package that Mike Kafka now has at his disposal again. And you think about I can't remember who it was against, but he had this catch in the middle of the season where he took this huge hit over the middle of the field, and it was to convert on a 3rd and 5. And it was just one of those really tough type of plays that you want to see your running backs make. You think back to the I believe it was the wild card game. It was a 4th and 1. They did a wing back sweep to Matt Breida, and he juked out
for that first down. Yeah.
Yeah, he juked out like 2 players in space and then dove for the first down. He just seems to have that will and that want and that desire that is so cliche, but that Brian Dable and Joe Shane seem to be preaching about this team. And they bring him back, and I think he is a good spell to Saquon Barkley and somebody who is quite affiliated with this offense. So I appreciated that retention right there. Also, Nick Gates. Oh, no, we didn't get the Nick Gates yet. He ends up walking out. That was really unfortunate. But you said Jamie Gillen. I didn't see the contract numbers on that because Jamie Gillen's a little bit up and down for me, Ed. And I kind of wanted to ask your opinion on that because, yes, he's a Scottish hammer and he has some punts where you're like, oh my God, that was like 70 yards. But then there are times where he just shanks it like 28 yards out of bounds. And I'm like, all right, that's a no-go. You can't have that whatsoever. So what were your thoughts on the Jamie Gillen re-signing?
Well, let me just mention Sterling Shepard quickly before I get into Gillen. And I just wanted to say that I was really happy to see the Giants bring Shepard back. I mean, it's a low cost veteran minimum deal, no real risk for the Giants. Had Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post on my show Monday morning, and he and I had talked about Shepard. And the thing that surprised me with Shepard is that they did this now instead of doing it in July or whatever when they could, after Shepard could pass a physical. And I think probably the reason is this way he can rehab at the Giants facility. They can monitor his progress. They know he's going to be back, so they didn't wait. But anyway, I'm glad to see Shepard back. But in terms of Gillen, I was a little bit surprised going all the way back to training camp that they didn't provide Gillen with some competition last year in training camp. They never brought in even an undrafted free agent, even somebody to just theoretically push him a little bit. What I will say is that, yes, he was very inconsistent throughout much of the season. When you talk to the Giants, you talk to McGahee toward the end of the season, the Giants thought Gillen was much better late in the season. They thought he was much more consistent with his punting and where the ball landed and not hitting as many of those shank type punts or, punts that just didn't go where the Giants needed them to go. So they saw improvement, or they felt there was improvement. They love this kid's talent. And I was a little bit surprised. I think it's a 2-year, $5 million deal or $4 million with incentives that make it 5, which is not bad money at all for a punter. I'm a little surprised by it. I'm a little surprised that it's not a 1-year deal where they're making him come in and compete for the job. But they obviously like this kid's talent. And like I said, they feel like from beginning of the season to the end that he got much better. So I think that's what this signing is that they think his best work is coming up, is still ahead of him.
Okay, yeah, that was one that I was a little bit curious about, just because I remember there were times where I was sitting in front of the TV, Ed, and I was like, "What is this punter doing, man? A 30-yard?"
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. The ones that drove me crazy, Nick, to be honest with you, is, and Thomas McGahee, Giants special teams coordinator, talked about this a few times during the season. The ones that drove me nuts, if you look at Gillen's touchback percentage, he was way down toward the bottom of the league in touchback percentage. It was something like 12% of his punts ended up in the end zone. And that was the worst of his career. And what McGahee said was that he's so strong, he hasn't learned to control it. He hasn't learned, it's like a pitcher learning to throw a changeup. He hasn't mastered it yet. They feel, and it obviously it looks like they feel he will, or they feel he's making progress toward doing it. Because the ones that drove me crazy were the ones from the 40, that landed in the end zone all the time. Those are the ones that drove me crazy, because that if you're going to punt from the 40, you better pin the team inside the 10, or it's not worth punting from there.
And that makes sense too, because he was probably trying to really control it sometimes when he was punting like way back, and then it would only go 30 yards because he's really trying to direct it. So the accuracy is definitely an issue. He just doesn't necessarily have that control, but he's only 25 years old. So hopefully Thomas McGahee can get the most out of him. And you touched on Sterling Shepard too, Ed. I mean, I'm really.
The only other thing I was going to say about Gillen was McGahee made the reference to Jeff Fiegels all the time. And Jeff Fiegels was in the league for 20 years or so. And Giants fans saw Jeff Fiegels in the last few years of his career. And what the point that Thomas McGahee made several times was that Jeff Fiegels, who's known for his accuracy and his punt placement and all of that, he said Jeff Fiegels didn't really figure it out until 10 or 11 years into his career. So he's making the point that this is still a young punter with a lot of improvement to come. But yeah, go ahead and talk about Shep.
I'm just happy that he's coming back. I mean, there's no better hype man than Sterling Shepard. And you could see that on the broadcast angle every single game. Whenever Daniel Jones did anything, whenever any of the wide receivers did anything, Sterling Shepard was jumping up and down. He was talking trash. And we know how he's the longest tenured New York Giant now. He's been. And I feel like he embodies what it means to be a New York Giant. It's just so unfortunate that he has suffered all these damn injuries, but it's cool that he can come back. Hopefully he'll pass a physical, like you said, in July, and he can see the football field again.
Yeah, Joe Shane calls him a juice guy. We'll just have to see if there's actually any juice left in those legs after a couple of devastating injuries. And I don't think anybody would count on Shepard for 70, 75 catches, but whatever he can give you as a fourth wide receiver, as a chain mover, as a leader in the locker room, whatever he can give you before the Giants probably move him into the front office somewhere, which I wouldn't be surprised to see someday. If he's healthy enough to give you something, then that would be awesome.
Yeah, I would love it. I would love to see it.
You and me both. Well, I tell you one other thing that I would have loved to have seen that we're not going to see is Nick Gates back with the Giants. Gates signed 3-year, $16.5 million contract, I think, with incentives that can push it to $18 million. Ironically enough, with the Washington Commanders, which means he'll play all of his home games on the field where he suffered that horrible injury 2 years ago. But Nick Gates no longer a Giant, and I'm bummed because he's a great guy. I thought he was a hard-nosed player. I thought he was a good player. I was hoping he'd be back, but it wasn't to be.
Unfortunately, salutations though to Nick Gates. I mean, I hope that he plays well in 16 games or 15 games next year, just not the 2 against the New York Giants if he ends up being a starter. But that is kind of crazy, man. You go to the field where you had that devastating injury, and it was awesome that he even made the comeback. And remember, he started as like the 6th offensive lineman when the Giants were in that weird phase of Mike Kafka's offense when they were trying to find themselves before Isaiah Hodgins' rise to prominence.
Well, that was also when Bellinger was hurt, and they didn't really have a tight end. And if you remember, they would go at times with 8 offensive linemen, instead of using tight ends. Crazy stuff.
I remember it well, Ed. I remember it
well.
What
do you even call that formation with 8 offensive linemen?
Maybe big with like 3 eyes or 3 G's or something like that. Just a really big formation. But Nick Gates started like that, and then Ben Bredesen ended up getting injured, so he slid into that left guard spot after Azudu went down, and he played pretty admirably. Like I really have a lot of admiration for Nick Gates. It sucks that he's no longer a New York Giant, but I do wish him the best in Washington.
This for me, Nick, it's one of those things. Obviously, the Giants brought in John Feliciano last year to be the starting center, and obviously Joe Shane and Brian Daboll have connections to Feliciano from Buffalo. And it always kind of felt like, and the Giants haven't brought Feliciano back yet either, but it always has kind of felt like if they were going to bring that they would bring one of those two guys back and not both. It always kind of felt to me like and I think this happens in the NFL. This happened when Joe Judge was head coach and he brought in Nate Ebner to be the special teams guy and he kicked Michael Thomas out the door and Michael Thomas is still playing and that still annoys me that that he did that but I kind of feel the same way about this one. For Shane and Dable, their connection and their trust is with Feliciano. It's not with Gates. And it always kind of felt like if push came to shove, this would be the choice they would make.
I understand where you're coming from. I also don't think John Feliciano will garner as much as Nick Gates did on the open market. I'm wondering what his market is right now, and if he would come back to the New York Giants. I'm imagining it's going to be significantly less than whatever Gates just signed for.
And that might be part of it too, because we talk about the center position, and I looked at this a while back, and the last time the Giants had a center who started for more than one season, the last guy who did that for the Giants was Weston Richburg.
Okay.
So it's been, I think that's 2016. I think was the year that Richburg left. So it's been a never-ending cycle of centers, and I for one would love to see the Giants draft and develop a center in this coming draft. So maybe that's the plan. Is Feliciano's cheaper than Gates? We go with that as a placeholder and develop a guy.
You got Joe Tippmann from Wisconsin. You got John Michael Schmitz from Minnesota, some Big Ten centers who are pretty solid. I don't know if they would be available in the second round. Maybe Tippmann would be. John Michael Schmitz might not be. So if the Giants did want him, they might have to pick him at 25. I'm wondering, I'm very curious to see how the rest of this free agent period pans out, because it kind of helps set us up for the draft, at least in terms of what the Giants may need. I like this addition of an interior defensive lineman, a veteran interior defensive lineman, and linebacker, because the Giants weren't able to land a Bobby Okereke or a Bobby O or whatever, then who would have been their line? They would have had to basically use one of their top two picks on the linebacker, or they would have had to enter this season with the Jalen Smiths and the Austin Calitros and the Tay Crowders of the world, which is not something any Giant fan wants to see.
No, we didn't want to see that. And obviously day 2 of free agency, the quote unquote negotiating window where nothing is actually supposed to be official, but everything really is. So, free agency is actually done by the time the signing period starts, or at least the good part of free agency is done. So, which is just kind of weird.
I wonder, Ed, is this going to end up being like college football, to where people just commit and decommit? Like we saw a little bit of that last year with J.D. McKissick, who commit to go to the Buffalo Bills, and then he was like, "Nah, I'm actually going to return to Washington. We're named the Commanders now. We're not the football team anymore, so let me play for the Commanders instead." And then the Bills went out and traded for Nyheim Hines. So I'm wondering if that can still realistically happen. I don't envision that happening too often or too much, but maybe down the road a little bit. Maybe this ends up evolving into college football.
I'm sure it could. Anyway, last thing, just curious if there's anything that you're curious about when it comes to day 2, when it comes to what else the Giants might do.
Yeah, tight end and safety. I want to know what's going to happen with Julian Love. Is Julian Love not coming back to the New York Giants, since they did not extend any type of, or at least I haven't been aware of an offer sheet that they've extended to him? And if they did extend it to him, maybe it was not enough. It seems like he has a robust market. So how are you going to replace Julian Love? Are you confident enough in Dane Belton, who was benched after the Detroit game? And I think they wanted to bench him after the Houston game when he missed that run fit against Dameon Pierce that ended up going for 44 yards against the Houston Texans. So I'm wondering, if the Giants don't add safety help, then safety becomes a pretty big need, especially in a defense ran by Wink Martindale, where he likes to use a lot of sub packages. So the safety position, I'm definitely keeping an eye on. And also tight end. We hear Mike Gesicki's name thrown out a lot with the New York Giants, and he wouldn't be one that I would originally have thought that Joe Shane would have wanted, just because he's basically a wide receiver. He doesn't block all that much. I know we have a blocking guy in Dane or Daniel Bellinger, but adding another tight end who can block really enhances your ability to run the football out of 12 personnel. So I think the tight end and the safety positions are two of the positions that I'm really looking at heading into day 2.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me talk about Julian Love and Darius Slayton, who are two guys that you know, obviously have been Giants for a while. Giants fans are kind of attached to. I don't think either one of them is coming back. In reference to Julian Love, if you read the tea leaves of the things that Joe Shane has said, he has said multiple times there is depth in the free agent market at safety. There is
Yep.
depth in the draft at safety. He would probably like to have Julian Love back if he could sign Julian Love for $4 or $5 million a year. But Julian Love's market is taking him to $8 or $10 million a year, is what it looks like. And I'm sorry, Joe's not going to pay that kind of money. And the reality of it is the same thing with Darius Slayton. I think the rest of the league is going to value what Slayton can do more than the Giants do. I think the Giants, you saw it last year. They tried to push him out the door last year. They made him take a pay cut. He was the last guy on the list when the season started. He didn't get a chance to play until everybody else bombed. And I just don't think, for whatever reason, I just don't think they really value Slayton maybe the rest of the way the rest of the league will. So I have my doubts that either of those guys will come back.
I'm right there with you, Ed. I was wondering if maybe Julian Love was holding out for the Chicago Bears, who are just spending money right now, and they've spent so much.
How much sense does that make? He went to Notre Dame. He's from Chicago. I think his wife is from Chicago. That's where his family is. I think the Bears are all in with the moves that they've made, some of the money that they've spent. I would hate to see the Giants lose Julian Love, but for Love, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I do think if you just kind of read between the lines, the Giants don't have a ton of money to spend, even after they get some sort of a restructure done with Leonard Williams and the Galladay money. And if they're able to get a deal with Barkley, they don't have gobs of money to spend. If they can save a little bit of money at the safety position, I think they'll do it.
Yeah, and I think it's probably prudent for them to do that, especially if the market for Love, as we said, is as robust as Judy Batista said on NFL Network. But yeah, hey, Slayton and Love, they did well for us in 2019, but it's time to move on, it looks like.
Looks that way. And all right, and it looks like it's time for us to move on after I stole Mr. Falato here for a quick podcast. Nick, I appreciate you jumping on, and I'll try to leave a little meat on the bone for you and Chris to talk about later on the Chris and Nick show, which I hope folks will listen to as well. So guys, look forward to that. And Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please take care of each other, stay safe out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.